All right, welcome back to the Low Six Podcast. I am Jason Retz with my co-host Eric Dettman. We are here in the middle of March. It seems like just a few days ago, February started. I mean, that Super Bowl was just crazy. I can't believe how the Seahawks pulled that off. It's unbelievable. I mean, I look back at the play of the Seahawks, and defense wins, right? Like that's just what it comes down to. So that'll be exciting. See what happens next season. All right. So as you can see, we are back with our special guest, Alex Lyons. Alex did such a great job with us last time. Like we had so many people that gave us such great feedback. We wanted to dig more into Alex's brain. Last time we talked about kind of how he looks at things. And now we want to kind of analyze that even a little further. We throw stuff off Alex all the time. I speak for Eric as well. Such quality of thought process to figure out what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I think I've said this before, but Alex has a great way of telling us we're wrong without making us feel we're stupid.
Mhm. Second that.
So, Alex, without any further ado, Eric has proposed some great questions to you in the recent past that you've had a great thought process to figure out. So, Eric, let's walk through that first one just to get kicked off. So, what was the question you proposed to Alex?
Yeah, so I texted you and Alex probably a month ago or so at this point, and just this idea of strides. And strides are a big part of our program. They're a big part of like what we do on a really consistent basis. And I asked for Alex's input, like, does it make sense to do strides uphill? And when I say uphill, I'm talking like 1, 2% grade, not, some 7% thing where we're trying to run as fast as we can for 20 seconds, or I'm sorry, like 7 or 8 seconds. But rather something like 20, 25 seconds. And my thought process around that was, something that Jay Johnson talks a lot about is like ending with strides because you are ending with proper running form, a little bit of running economy. We know that hills really help with running economy. So my question was, does it make sense? Should we be considering doing strides more often? And that created this wonderful conversation that the three of us were able to have, and was one of those Alex eloquent ways of, and I'll let him kind of share that.
Yeah, thanks, man, and thank you, Jason, for the nice introduction. It's always nice to hang out with you guys a little bit and talk coaching. Um, so Eric, basically the question that he had put on the table was like, and I'm gonna phrase it this way just because I think it will be helpful to what we talk about in a little bit, was like, does it make sense to take all of our strides and make them uphill instead of on the track? And this was track season specifically, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And that's like, of course, the answer to that question, as we kind of got into it, is like it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. And I think this is indicative of like things that happen a lot in coaching, which is coaches are presented with arguments sometimes at clinics or sometimes by other coaches in their conversations or like an article that we read that like option A is better than option B or option C is better than option D always. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. And really, it's the job of a coach to figure out in what situations would A be better and in what situations would B be better and what fits the specific context that I'm in. So in Eric's case, for example, one of the things that Eric had proposed is like a primary goal of this would be to improve athlete health. That like maybe people would be more durable and less prone to injury if they did all their strides up a hill instead of on the track. And like, I mean, I'm sure all three of us have heard this that like hills make your running form better, so they're safer, right? Like we've all heard that. I'm sure the people in the audience have heard that. And that's kind of situationally true. What a hill does is it changes the part of the body that's loaded more versus loaded less. So when you run uphill, there's more load on the posterior lower leg than when you're running flat. So like the musculature of the calf, right? Like your gastrocnemius, your soleus, all the stuff that you have back there in your lower leg is loaded more when you go up a hill. And it's loaded less when you go down a hill. Your quads, for example, are loaded less when you go up a hill and more when you go down a hill, right? So for a durability question, like, is this going to be safer for a kid? For somebody who has maybe perpetual issues in the posterior lower leg. They have a history of Achilles problems. They have a history of soleus, gastrocnemius, deep posterior musculature of the lower leg strains, for example. Going up a hill is riskier for them than running on the flat, right? So you're actually creating more stress in the area of the body where they have had historical problems. Versus if you have a kid who has knee problems, for example, maybe patellofemoral pain syndrome, or a kid that has IT band problems, or a kid that strains their quad or something like that, running up a hill for them is actually a little bit safer in some ways. And the deceleration element, because the velocities are lower, is also safer. So basically, if you have a kid with knee problems, running up a hill is safer than running on the flat. And if you have a kid with calf problems, running on the flat is safer than running up a hill. So whether this thing affects durability in the way that Eric is talking about is completely dependent on the athlete in front of you and what their background and injury history is. Another thing to think about would be like the specificity of the exercise. So in track season, what a lot of programs use strides for is sort of micro doses of work at specific race paces. I'm trying to create these little hits of work where my athlete is neurologically, neuromuscularly developing rhythm and familiarity with goal race speeds. So you got a high school boy who wants to run 4:16 for the 1600, 64 seconds a lap, 32 seconds at 200, 16 seconds 100. We're just like doing some hundreds at 16 point is just like drilling the rhythm of their goal speed. Well, if that's a big part of why you do strides, that's going to be accomplished less effectively on a hill than on a track because the hill is less specific to what you are going to be doing in the race. That doesn't mean it's bad or that there's times to not use it. But if the goal is a hit of specificity, the hill kind of doesn't match with that goal. So it really depends on what you're doing, right? So to like summarize this in a way that might be applicable for people, if I have a kid who has maybe like a history of high hamstring or let's just say when I'm starting my specific period, forget the injury stuff for a little while. When I'm starting my specific period and the kids haven't done tons of stuff on a track and spikes, I often use hills as like bridge sessions. Like maybe early in a cycle, we're going to do some of our work on the hill. And then later in a cycle, we're going to transfer that and do it on the track, right? That's one way you can use a hill. Because Eric's totally correct. Hills are a great way to improve running economy. They do things to like the musculotendinous unit that's kind of similar to what's happening to a plyometric. It's like a really specific plyo. So if I want that early in the season to like generally increase running economy, cool. And then maybe later in the season, I'm going to take that increased economy or increased stiffness that I've created and apply it to the more specific pattern on the track as I'm getting ready for my peak event later in the year. So that would be one way that you could apply it through your cycle. But the main takeaway is whenever you hear is A better or is B better, think about what am I trying to accomplish? What's my situation? And is A a better match or is B a better match?
And I love that you say that, Alex. Is A a better match, B a better match? Like, what am I trying to accomplish? Because I do think, Jason, we talked a little bit about this a couple of podcasts ago coming out of like clinic season, and you get overwhelmed with all this information and you hear like this person's really good, they do this, right? And there's this idea of like, I want to do that. But I think the way that Alex looks at it is like, what am I trying to accomplish? And
Yeah.
does this fit within that realm? And I remember hearing you say this, Alex, like, I don't know, 2 years ago. And it like totally transformed the way that I think about workouts and I think about the weight room and I think about like race strategy with my kids. It's like, what am I trying to get out of this and trying to be like really um a lot, just like more dedicated to that thought process versus like we're just doing this because I know it works.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think of sometimes we blanket terms, right? Like we say strides, but you really need to like factor tree strides, right? At the top, it's strides, but then from that, there are so many different things I can accomplish with it. Where in my season, where in the progress of my run, what am I trying to achieve? And if you can do a better job of not just throwing these blanket terms, then you get the if then when situation, right? And
Yeah.
I love the fact that people say they do strides, but we all know that everybody does them a little different, or they're trying to achieve something different, or they don't even know what they're trying to achieve. They're just speeding up, putting it in there at some point. And I think as a coach, we owe our athletes the fact to understand why and when and how. Um, Because honestly, a 10-second hill sprint seems very harmless. But for that one kid that's got calf problems, you could be turning their season into a negative just by 5 by 10 seconds a couple times a week.
Yeah, for sure. It would be something to be aware of, right? And I don't think this is what Jason's saying, but I'm certainly not saying any kid who's had a history of calf issues can like never do hill sprints. Of course, there's time and places that it's applicable. It's just like you got to know that there's a little bit of a higher risk for that kid than like a hill sprint isn't automatically safer for every kind of kid than a flat sprint. And I think that's often how it's presented.
Yep.
So,
Um, yeah, go ahead.
so for you, you talk to coaches quite frequently, and so strides is just one example of
This or
if
that.
not this, then that.
Yeah, yeah, this or that.
What is another common this or that that you get hit with a lot that maybe a
Yeah.
beginning coach or even somebody who's experienced may need to just think through a little bit more?
A big one recently, I think this is, and probably due to just like the presence of double threshold in the discourse, is like, is threshold better to do continuous or is it better to do as intervals, right? And a lot of people, I would say, they've 10 years ago, the Jack Daniels like 4 mile threshold run was like the thing that everybody did. And now it's like the broken threshold interval stuff, a la the Ingebrigtsens and the Marius Bakken Norwegian method stuff is like the thing that everybody does. And I think there are times and places where both of those are useful, and it just depends on the situation. So this is zooming out a little bit, but one of the most important things that I learned from Dr. Messer, and that he has some cool ways of enforcing this with slides, which if we want to talk about the long run, I can talk through that a little bit. But the most important sentence that Messer ever taught me about is he's like, every stimulus, everything is an interaction of volume and intensity, right? So basically, how long the stimulus lasts and how hard you're running over the course of that duration, those two things together really drive what's happening inside the body, right? So, like in a long run format, for example, I could make an argument that 65 minutes at a faster pace is a stronger stimulus than 75 minutes at a slower pace. That doesn't mean that X or Y is better. It just means like the overall signal of the stimulus is not just about volume, how long you're going, and not just about intensity, how fast you're going. It's about both of them together, right? So the thing with like when we look at why professional runners who are doing double threshold, why they use intervals, it has to do with controlling the intensity of the effort, right? Making sure that the effort is like really carefully calibrated and doesn't kind of creep up and get too hard as the situation goes, right? So they're really controlling the intensity and keeping it a manageable level through lactate testing, through all these other means that most high school coaches do not have available, right? But the reason they're doing that, the reason they're controlling the intensity so carefully is because the duration of the stimulus is big, right? Like I'm going to do 10K in the morning and 10K in the afternoon. I'm going to do 20K of threshold work, and then I'm going to take an easy day, and then I'm going to do it again. So in 3 days, I've got 40K of threshold work in the bank. That's a lot of duration, right? If the intensity gets too high, the duration of that session becomes unsustainable, right? Like you're not going to be able to recover, you're going to get hurt, whatever, right? So in most high school situations, you are not doing 40K of threshold in 3 days, right? The duration of the stimulus is not nearly that long. It's much lower, right? So if the duration is lower, there are situations where the intensity can be higher, right? I've lowered the duration so I can raise the intensity, a la a classic 2005 Jack Daniels 4 mile threshold run. If you test the kid's lactate at the end of that session, would it be higher than what like the literature says you would aim for in a double threshold workout? Absolutely. It's going to be a harder workout. It's going to be of greater intensity, but it's going to be of shorter duration. So if you want to send a signal to the body for adaptation and you aren't leaning as much into duration, it might be a time to lean a little bit more into intensity, right? So summarizing this in a practical way for high school coaches, if you have an older athlete who does 4 to 5 miles of threshold work a week and has experience enough and understanding enough of what you're looking for that they can get like somewhere in the zip code of the right effort. They're not like racing it as hard as they can and like throwing up in a bush afterwards. It's totally fine if you want to do a continuous effort. It's totally fine. If there's lots of reasons to do intervals as well, certain types of athlete skill sets, like people that lean a little bit more toward the middle distance stuff, they do better in threshold in a lot of circumstances when things are broken up, for example. But it's not like you can't do a continuous threshold run like it's bad, right? Dr. Messer, one of our favorite people, almost all of his threshold work is delivered in continuous formats. And that's because he's doing it like on a Monday, like a 4 to 5 mile progression run or a 4 or 5 mile continuous threshold. And then he like sprinkles it in some other places through the week, but he's not coming back, 48 hours later to do 20K in 2 different sessions. So the summary of this is like there are times and situations where broken intervals are better. And I would say that is often when you are really trying to control the intensity because the volume of work you're doing is a little bit bigger. And then there's times when it's totally fine to do something continuous because the durations aren't quite as high and maybe you can allow the intensity to rise a little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, so it's sustainable and attainable.
Yeah, challenging but attainable and therefore
Okay, Mr.
sustainable is
Besser.
the Jeff Messer special. That's right. Love that.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And there's different points in the season and the age of the athlete. And that's one of the things I think we've adjusted really well in our program is finding the age of the athlete and what they are capable of doing, exactly like you said, and making that stimulus um, attainable for them to be able to do. Um,
Yeah, definitely. I
so
think what's great about having Jason and Eric both on the podcast is like you guys have delivered this in slightly different ways. I would say overall, it's not like Eric never does broken stuff, but like Eric's probably done a little bit more continuous stuff in his threshold the last couple of years, and Jason's done probably a little bit more broken stuff in his threshold the last couple of years. And the results have been great on both sides because you both understand how to apply it and you're leveraging this interaction of volume and intensity.
yeah, and I'll be honest, like we flipped the other way. We used to do longer stuff, and I just felt the skill level of my kids weren't able to attain it. And to Eric's credit, some of the stuff he's influenced me. We started doing 2Ks a little bit more frequently, and then chopping it up from there, and it has worked very well. But same thing, we're achieving the same thing, just a little bit different way to get there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you're figuring out how to manipulate those to fit the kids.
Speaking of 2Ks, like we'll still do that with some of our freshmen, and we did it on Thursday with some of them. And one of their Strava captions was, "I'm really starting to hate 2Ks," which made me chuckle a little bit. I'm like, "Buddy, we've only done it twice at this point. Like, you got a long way to go."
Yeah.
Definitely.
So,
Uh,
Alex, your interaction with coaches, I mean, you've been helping tons of people throughout the course of not only cross country season, off season, and into track season. Um, how do you feel like progression of work has changed, or what do you adapt to coaches to help them to get through the stressor? So, what are some of the extra things that you will throw on top or help coaches with, whether it be strength or warm up or cool down? What are some of the other things that you help them evolve in their training programs as they progress from not knowing what they're doing to getting a little bit better at what they're doing?
Um, are you asking about like stuff besides like the running workouts, basically?
Correct. What are some of
Yeah,
those necessary factors that we should sprinkle in?
yeah. Um, all right, we're gonna have to be careful with this one because this is like an absolute rabbit hole. But like strength training is a big part of a high performance team. And I think it is generally misused in most places, or at least maybe let's say suboptimally used. Like there's places that you can use it better. I am not a strength and conditioning expert, and I don't want to present myself as one. I can tell you about what smarter people have told me, but generally speaking, I think that's a big miss. Is people are they're not using their strength programs in ways that are maybe optimal. So let's see how we can do this kind of concisely. A big thing to understand about strength, like I care about strength training primarily for athlete health. That doesn't mean it doesn't have performance effects. Absolutely, a kid can become faster because of what you're doing in your non-running programs, in the weight room, in your other stuff. But I care most about durability. I want the strength training to increase the athlete's tolerance for training so that they can train either at the same level and be healthier or at a higher level and be equally as healthy. That's really what I want to get done. And in order to do that, you have to understand that different tissues in the body respond differently to the same kinds of load, right? So, for example, muscle tends to keep responding to load as the volume goes up, right? So if you're a I don't know anything about bodybuilding, but like apparently bodybuilders like go into the weight room and like lift forever. Yeah, exactly. And then you look like Retz, right? But if you're like, if you're trying to get jacked and you do 6 sets instead of four, that's like a better input for hypertrophy, assuming the quality of those sets is comparable, right?
Yeah,
The
there's a
demand.
little bit in there, but yes, you're getting there. Yeah.
Assuming the demand of the set is still high, you're approaching but not quite going to failure. As you accumulate more volumes at comprehensive intense or at comparable intensities, the stimulus to the muscle like keeps working. It just becomes better and better, more and more effective, generally speaking, right? That is not at all true for bone, and that is not at all true for tendon. Those are things in the body that go like colloquially, they refer to it as like deaf to load, right? So if you load bone over and over again in a very repetitive cycle, it like works well at the beginning and then starts to work less well and then works not at all at the end, right? So this means where you put strength training in your week. If your goal is to affect bone and tendon as well as muscle, like placement becomes really important. So here's an example. Bone responds to fast, novel, high force loading, right? Another way to say that would be like a plyometric would do that. Like you're loading the bone really quickly in kind of like novel ways, like different planes of motion, different kinds of jumps, things like that. Basketball players have great bone health because they jump all the time in all these different ways, right? One of the things they say in the literature, bone is like error driven, like it likes these kind of different novel loads. In the first 20 contacts, and a contact is like jumping on and off the ground once, like hitting the ground once is a contact. In the first 20 contacts, bone is hyper responsive to load. Just contacts, just like one contact on the ground. 20 to 40 still kind of responsive. 40 to 60 starts to go down. When you're over 100 contacts, you're applying the stress to the bone, but the bone isn't really like adapting to it. You're not getting an adaptive signal. You're getting the stress without the stress response that creates adaptation, right? So what does that mean? If you go for a run and then do your plyometrics, you're affecting other stuff. Like you can affect running economy, you can affect some of the things that we were talking about on the hill applies to this. But what you're 100% not doing is you are not making the bone stronger because it's gone deaf to load before you've applied the load that's designed to strengthen the bone. So if you want to use plyometrics specifically as an input for increasing bone health, for increasing bone density and durability, it needs to be before a run or separate from a run. And that's a really big deal because most people don't do that. They
Yeah.
generally go for a run and then do their strength training in whatever form that might mean, including plyometrics. Now, that's not bad, like overall. It's just bad if your goal is to use them to strengthen the bones. Does that make sense?
Absolutely
Yep.
does.
So like then you what would you do then if you wanted to use like this is why I'm nervous about talking about this because like this is very complicated and hard to get through. But if you wanted to use low grade, very basic plyometrics to increase bone health. The two most common areas of stress fractures in runners are the tibia and the metatarsals. So if I want to do something that's going to affect the tibia and the metatarsals, I can do like some basic jumping plyometric schemes, 20 to 40 contacts, somewhere in that sweet spot. And I'm going to warm up in a way that is not running. So I might like ride a bike or go on a elliptical machine or something like maybe I don't know. I'm going to do something like that. And then I'm going to do my plyometrics and then I'm going to do my run or workout would be the sequence. So you're putting it at the beginning. The other option would be do one in the morning and the other in the afternoon. Run plyos, plyos run, whatever. but I am not going for a 2 hour workout and
Mhm.
then doing my plyometrics if the objective is to strengthen the bones.
Let me ask you this, just not to cut you off, but I'm
Yeah.
going to. Um, so, like, we have it on Wednesdays, we call like our speed development day. We'll do a
Yeah.
little warm up, we'll do some sprint drills, whatever, run over wickets, do some flying 50s.
Yeah.
If I put the plyos ahead of the wickets, flying 50s, but after the warm up, am I getting the benefit of building bone strength? Or because that warm up is 10, 12, maybe up to 15 minutes, I lose that effect?
Yeah. The short answer is I don't know, but I'm going to tell you the answer to this question that I got from people in the PT world because I
Yeah.
asked the same thing. And they were like, they said a contact is a contact.
Hmm.
So a 15-minute run, you're you're thousands of contacts, right? Like
Yeah.
you're way over the
Right.
initial thing. So if you're trying to optimize the stimulus, they recommended doing a warm up that does not involve tons of repetitive movement. So
Hmm.
maybe that's a combination of like some kind of cross training and some kind of dynamic exercise, like you're doing leg swings or like a lunge matrix or something like that. This is challenging to apply to a high school team because you often don't have the latitude of like, I'm going to take 30 kids and have them ride an elliptical,
This would be my
right?
next question.
You'd be
Yeah.
like, so that how does this work? So I
Right.
think you have to think about like how I don't think there's like a right or wrong, black or white thing, right? Just like we were talking about before, it's not like A or B. It's how can I keep the contacts as low as possible and get them as warm as possible to do something safe. So maybe that's like, maybe a lunge matrix is a good example. Maybe you're doing stuff like leg swings. Maybe you're doing some slight skipping drills here and there, but there's not a ton of them. You just like want to raise. I even thought of weird like old man exercise, like aerobics classes where they just like march in place and put their hands over their head. I don't know how the sell of that will go to your
Yeah.
16-year-olds, but that is a way to raise heart rate, to warm the body, like to literally heat up the musculature in a way that doesn't involve running or jumping around tons of times. So I think the idea is just like best case scenario, like do your best in the circumstances. Try to do something besides a 15-minute jog, keep the contacts low, and then do your plyos and then do your sprints and you're off.
So if you're a coach evaluating your own program, right, you
Yeah.
need to start at the very beginning. What do you do the first 30 seconds the kids are starting to be active and work from there and literally figure out your whys for everything that you're doing to see if what you're doing makes sense because you may be throwing all these great things in that you've heard at clinics,
Yeah.
but they may not make any sense when you try to figure out the whys of what you're doing. Oh, I'm doing this because I heard this. I'm
Yeah.
doing this because I heard this.
Yeah.
These are all great things, but they may not be great in the sequence at which you're trying to achieve success and health for the student athlete.
That's totally true. And here's like a great example of this. First of all, we haven't talked about tendon stuff. Like there's we have talked about 1% of the strength training world. And I think coaches are so used to like we're kind of like applied exercise scientists. Like we're trying to make stuff happen in the body every day. So we just sort of get used to the idea of like making our best guess and seeing what happens. And I think there's certain worlds where that works okay. And like the running workouts, it works kind of okay. The strength training world, I really think we need help. Like I think we need to talk to people. And I don't mean like, yeah, it's a great start to go to the football coach and have the football coach teach your kids like correct deadlifting form if they deadlift. Good start. The football coach is not going to be telling you in most circumstances the nuance of different tissue loading at different times based on like how it's applied in the week. Like you really need to find people like in the physical therapy community, in the strength and conditioning community who are experts in their fields who can help you out. Because I didn't know any of this stuff. I needed people to walk me through it. In your example, Jason, of like we can have the right tool applied at the wrong time and cause a problem. Here's a really easy example of that. An athlete on your team is getting hurt and you hear like, oh, plyometrics are good for bone health. Lifting of certain kinds can be good for tendon health. I'm going to put this athlete in the weight room to make their capacity higher so that they can tolerate more training. What if the problem with this athlete is nutrition? What if they're underfueled, right? If you look at really interesting studies, if anybody's curious for resources, check out stuff by Dr. Rich Willie. He is a PT in Missoula, Montana, works a lot in the ultra community. He has a whole thing like a running lab thing. I've taken courses with him. He's phenomenal. One of the things he said is if you look at the ultra community, basically no one in the ultra community gets bone stress injuries if you control for nutrition. So if they're eating as much as they're expending, they don't get bone injuries. Bone injuries are actually much more driven by intensity than by volume. It's the musculature applying stress and strain to the bone that causes issues, not the like pounding of you on the ground, generally speaking. So this is all like a long way to say, if your kid is nutritionally deficient and you see durability problems and you put them in a strength training program without addressing the nutritional gap, all you've done is increase the demand of like they now need even more energy, even more calories than they had before, and now the gap got bigger and they're probably going to get hurt more, right? So that is a good concept applied at the wrong time. So you have to figure out like, why is this athlete hurt? What do we know about their nutrition? What do we know about the training inputs that we're doing? Because that can totally drive injury. Like it's this real unwinding, like a peeling of the onion to figure out what the problem is. And if you are the like, if you have a hammer, everything's a nail coach, you are going to make way more mistakes than you are good decisions, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, this is awesome. I know we're at 31 minutes, but this is pretty awesome.
All right. So just to wrap up here, because we are kind of getting over on time. You gotta figure out what you're doing, and if you don't know what you're doing, email Alex.
Or just use your community. Like there's tons of smart people around you who are experts in their thing. And if you're not, lean on their support and their guidance.
But let's give you one, Alex, go York. Two, go Lincoln as well.
Yeah.
God, the two teams, man, that I didn't love LT in high school and Wilson's arrival now that I coach. But anyways,
Wilson doesn't exist. I don't know what you're upset about.
Glad to be Wells, yes. No, Alex, give us like a quick 30-second synopsis on kind of your consulting and what you've done. Because obviously you and I have talked a bunch and it's been amazing, but want to give you an opportunity to talk about that really quick.
Yeah, thank you. I have a consulting business that I run for coaches, and basically it's a chance for us to kind of work together specifically on the issues that are of relevance to you. So if a coach is, trying to figure out, I have this constraint, da, 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 da. Like a clinic is basically an experience of talking to a general audience. And the nice thing about consulting is like we can kind of work together on the specifics of your situation and what you need. And that's taken a number of forms. Sometimes it's just like I have a conversation or two with a coach and that's it. And then there's people that we, meet every couple of weeks for a year. It kind of depends on what you're looking for, but it's basically just a chance to kind of dive into the things that are most relevant in your situation. And either I can hopefully help you with these things, or I can try to connect you with people in your network who can give you the guidance you're looking for to answer the questions that are top of mind.
And how do we find you?
I have a website. It's called, I think it's just lionsperformanceconsulting.com.
Awesome.
You can email me, lionsperformanceconsulting@gmail.com. There's also, and like I am a resource. I'm happy to help coaches. Check out if you're interested in the strength training world. I would look into Dr. Rich Willey's work. He's got some great, just like basic interviews on YouTube. There are courses that you can take online in some situations. Yeah, so I can either help you or I can connect you with people who can.
Awesome.
And if you did not listen to the other Alex episode, you need to go back. And if you're on the fence whether you need help or not, like you'll no longer be on the fence once you listen to both episodes. So, Alex, we appreciate you joining us again. We could literally do this for hours. 30 minutes went so fast. Like, I'm just thinking about my own program. I don't know about you, Eric, but like, I'm like, shoot, do I have that in the right spot? And like, we've talked. Like, you're still keep the wheels turning. So that's awesome.
Totally agree.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your month. For those of you listen, make sure you like, subscribe, share with your mom. I'm sure she will love this episode because of Alex specifically. So until we see you next time, thanks for listening. We'll see you again.